Okay, nice to see everybody again. This week is parshat Eikev, and I was reading on Shabbat this interesting story that relates to this week's Torah portion. It was about the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was the Rebbe Rayatz, his name was, or we call him the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he was the father-in-law of our Rebbe. And he talks about a story that happened when he was young, when his father was Rebbe, he was the Rebbe Rashab, Reb Shalom Dov Ber. And he speaks about how in that time it was in Russia, and it was during Tsarist Russia. And the Tsar was really not very good to the Jews. And a lot of people were saying that the Tsar wasn't really very smart, but he was running the country based on some of his ministers, and one minister in particular, the Minister of Interior, was really a horrible person, and he was really out to get the Jews. And to add to that, this was during the time of the Enlightenment, and there was a lot of enlightened Jews, maskilim, who wanted to abolish Torah and really not have a very enlightened view of Torah, not the regular way that we learn Torah, the way that we learn it according to our traditions. And they were trying to make a lot of decrees against the religious Jews in the time during Russia. And they were trying to pass this decree with this Minister of Interior, and they were succeeding. And it was terrible things that were going to happen to the Jewish people in Russia, former Soviet Union at the time. So the Rebbe Rashab asked his son, the Rebbe Rayatz, who became the Frierdiker Rebbe, he said to him, Yosef Yitzchak, I want you to go to Petersburg, to the capital, and I want you to do whatever you can do to abolish this decree from happening. And he said, how long should I stay there? And he says, as long as it's needed, even on the expense of your very life. Just make sure it's abolished. This is a terrible, terrible decree. And so he went to Petersburg, to the capital, and he wasn't really sure what he was going to do there, but he went. His father told him to go, so he went. And he was staying in a hotel there, and he stayed there for a few days. And finally, he meets this friend of his, whose name was Baron Gansberg. And this man says to him, he tells him why he's there, and he's trying to abolish this terrible decree from the Minister of Interior. He's not exactly sure what angle he should be doing it. And this friend of his says, maybe I can help you. I know somebody, this older man who's not a Jewish person, who lives here. And he actually used to be a mentor to the Minister of Interior. So let me try to introduce you to him. So he's very happy to make the introduction. And the Rebbe goes to the apartment of this elderly man. And he's a very refined, enlightened person. He's very wise. And the Rebbe makes a very good impression on him. They have all these discussions, these scholarly discussions, very intellectual discussions. And he leaves, and he keeps coming back for day after day to befriend this man. And after a few days, he felt like he had already befriended him sufficiently. So the next time he goes and he sits in this elderly man's apartment, he bursts out into tears. And the man is like, I don't understand. Why are you crying? And he starts telling him the whole story of what this Minister of Interior is trying to do to the Jews, and how terrible it is, and what's going to happen, the terrible ramifications for the Jewish people in Russia at the time. And the elderly man says, but why are you coming to me? And he says, but I heard that you have some connection to this Minister of Interior. And the elderly man says, well, I used to have connections with him, but he became very corrupt, and it became a very terrible situation with him. He became very, very evil, and my relationship with him had stopped. But let me think about what I can do to help you. Give me a couple days. He calls to the Rebbe after 2 days to come back to his apartment. He brings him into the apartment, and he takes him into one of these inside rooms of the house. And he says, nobody can know about this discussion. Nobody can know about what I'm giving you. But because I'm a loyal citizen of the country, and because I was very good friends with the Minister of Interior, he gave me this pass that allows me to go into the building where the Minister of Interior works at any time. Whenever I want, I can go in. And I'm giving this to you. I could be killed if anyone finds out. So if anyone finds out, you don't mention me at all. Don't mention me at all. You don't know me. But see if this can help you in any way. And so the Rebbe took this pass, and he did some investigation about this place. And this place where the Minister of Interior's office is an extremely, and this is what the elderly man told him also, it's a very dangerous place. It's the Secret Service is there, and it's not really a place that you really want to go into, let's put it that way. It's a very dangerous place, especially if you don't belong there. And with that, the Rebbe decided that he was going to go to this office building, and he comes to the door. He sees a guard there, and the guard is looking at him, and he's this religious Jew with a beard, with with a yarmulke, with everything, like the whole works. And he's like looking at him, but he gives him the pass, so the guard can't say anything. He goes right in. And the Rebbe at that point realized like he has to exude tremendous confidence, like as if he belongs here, that any slip up in the slightest way is going to give him away. So he walked, even though you can imagine how much his heart was pounding and how scared and terrified he was, he walks with total confidence down the corridor, and he asks, which floor is this Minister of Interior on? As if he totally belongs in the place, and the person directed him to the 4th floor. He went up to the 4th floor, and again, you can imagine like his palms must have been sweating, like who knows what he's feeling. Could be immediate death if he's caught here. And he's walking down the corridor, and he sees this very distinguished, important-looking individual coming out of an office from the back of that floor, and rushing out, and passes him very quickly. Doesn't even see him, and he's thinking like, this is a very important person. If this person knew that I was here, who he was, that would be the end of him. But thank God he passed him. He didn't even notice him, and he continues walking. And sure enough, every door has like a signpost on it whose office it is, and sure enough, the office that this man went out of was the Minister's of Interior's office, and this was the Minister of Interior, this evil man who he was trying to stop from doing these decrees. So he went into his office, and there's no one in the office, and he sees that on the desk there's a lot of piles of paper that the minister was going to either approve or not approve. And he had 2 stamps, approved or not approved. And he sees on the desk there's a big pile of papers which had already been stamped, either approved or not approved. And there was another pile of papers that he was going to go through. So he quickly starts looking through it, and he's trying to find the appeal that the maskilim, the enlightened people, had sent to this minister to approve, that would spell terrible things for the Jewish people. And he's looking through it, and he can't find it. It's not there. And then he sees that there's underneath this drawer. And in the drawer, there's some more papers. And he looks through those papers. These are papers that he hasn't yet gotten to. And he sees amongst those papers, there are a bunch of papers waiting approval from this group of maskilim who had been asking and all different kinds of things that they had been planning against the Jewish people. He quickly takes them out. He puts not approved on each of these papers, puts it in the pile of the approved, and leaves the office, and quickly makes his way out, again pretending that he belongs in this place, exuding total confidence and complete, not showing any kind of fear, total courage. He then goes back to the apartment of this elderly man, gives him the pass that he had been given, and then leaves the city of Petersburg that day and goes back to Lubavitch, to the city, and tells his father about his mission, that he accomplished what needed to be done. So this is a story of tremendous courage. And I mentioned this story this week because this week we talk about how a person could really be frozen with fear, paralyzed with fear, and how a person could have the confidence not to feel that way. So this week's Torah portion, Eikev, is actually one of the 7. There's 3 parshiot that are called Telata de Puranita, which means the 3 parshiot of punishment, or the 3 haftarot. See, every week we read a Torah portion that's from the book of the Torah, and then we read from the book of the prophets after that. And the Talata de Puranita means from those 3 weeks, from the 17th of Tammuz until the 9th of Av, there's 3 weeks, 3 difficult weeks, 3 weeks of sadness and mourning and hardship, because this is the time period that we mourn the destruction of the temple. And the Haftarot of those 3 weeks are talking about punishment and difficulties and hardships that the Jewish people are going to encounter. After Tisha B'Av, the fast of Tisha B'Av that we've just had, we have what's called the Sheva de Nechamta, the 7 Haftarot, the 7 portions of the prophets that are consolations. They talk about consolations. And this is after Tisha B'Av. So the first one was Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, which we read last Shabbat, which is comfort, comfort my people. God is comforting us. He's saying that God will remember us at the end of days, and we will be returned, and our people will be returned, and we will be again reunited with God. And this is what these 7 are all talking, 7 of consolation, where God is consoling us. We've just gone through the destruction of the temple, and God is saying to us, don't worry, I will remember you. It will come the time of the end of the days, and I will remember you, and I will be reunited with you. So this is a week that we also talk about one of these, of the 7 of consolations. And the Haftarah always reflects the prophets, the book of the prophets always reflects what's written in the weekly Torah portion. So every time we read a Torah portion, the Haftarah in some way is connected to it. It somehow is related to it. So if the Haftarah is all about consolation for us and God comforting us, then we have to find in this week's Torah portion as well that we have these ideas there. And Moshe is talking to the Jewish people. Again, the book of Deuteronomy is when Moshe is talking to the Jewish people really at his deathbed, as they're about to enter the land of Israel. We said it's him talking like kind of first person to the Jewish people, and he's reviewing all the things that happened from the time that they left Egypt until now, till they're about to go into the land of Israel. He's giving warnings and some things that they should remember about what happened in the past so they don't do these same mistakes again in the future. And he does say, though, that afterwards, at the end of the time, God will remember us and we will be making mistakes, but then we will be reunited with God. So he does say in this week's Torah portion, if you will say in your heart, these nations are more numerous than I, how can I dispossess them? Do not be terrified by them, for the Lord your God is among you, a great and awesome God. So Moshe is saying to them, don't be afraid, have confidence, have this confidence in God so you won't be afraid. And when we think about it, when we think about fear, there's so many things that we're afraid of. And if you think about the things that we're really afraid of, fear stops us from doing so much. You know, it stops us in our personal lives, it stops us collectively as a Jewish people, but fear has a way of paralyzing us and stopping us from doing what we really need to accomplish. And there's so many different kinds of fears that we can have. There could be a fear of what other people are going to say. It could be a fear of failure. It could be a fear of success, you know, interestingly enough. But yeah, it could be afraid to succeed because what's that going to mean? It could be a fear of your inadequacies. It could be a fear of your not being enough. There's so many fears that we have that contribute to our psyche, that stop us, that hold us back and prevent us from moving forward. And in this week's Torah portion, Moshe actually reminds us about how God took us out and he took us out of Egypt and he took us into the desert, and we were there for many, many years, for 40 years, and now we're about to enter the promised land. We're going into the land of Israel. And as he talks about the desert, so there are times when we speak about the desert and we say it was a nice place because we were full of miracles, it was God's miracles, but there was also a desert. It was a terribly vast desert where we needed God's protection in order to survive there, but a desert could be a very formidable place. And Moshe talks about this desert, and he actually describes it with a few words. He describes it with 6 words, and these 6 words are different stages of what fear does to us. And I want to go into each of the descriptions that he gives of this desert. So he describes this desert as Hamidbar, the desert, Hagadol, this very big desert, V'hanora, and this very dreadful desert that's full of nachash, snakes, saraf, and va'akrav, scorpions, snakes and scorpions, v'tzimon asher ein mayim, and there's a thirst there that there's no water can quench that thirst. And let's go into each of these descriptions of how he describes the desert to really understand the whole making of fear and what role fear plays in our own lives. Any of you felt ever afraid?
Yes.
Okay. What do you feel afraid about?
About the upcoming event.
Upcoming event?
Yeah, you don't know what will
You don't know,
happen.
is it going to be good? Is it not going to be good?
Yeah.
What kind of difficulty am I going to have? What kind of outcome is there? What kind of diagnosis is that?
Exactly.
These are all fears. Any other fears that you have?
Yeah, admitting.
Parenting fears. Are you a good parent? Yes. Are you failing in your parenting? Are you doing well in your parenting?
Maybe not having a well, yes, I mean, I have a fear of confrontation with other
Fear of
people.
confrontation.
I can't, but I mean, it's not like you have to do something, but yeah, it's a big fear of confrontation. I hate that.
Absolutely. Fear of confrontation is a big one. Any other fears that you have?
A lot of times people like arbitrarily kind of put a line in the sand that they're afraid to cross, so it could be just like whatever it is, like that personal, subjective fear that they have of crossing that line.
Absolutely. Fear of change. Fear of change or something,
The
doing
unknown.
something. Huh? The unknown, fear of the unknown. So these are all important fears that we have. And let's talk about the root of that fear, and we can speak about it based on this description that he gives about this midbar, this desert. So the desert is like a place of difficulty, of challenge. And we're leaving this desert to go into the land of Israel, to go into the land of the promised land. So it's allegorically, metaphorically speaking about how each of us are leaving this exile, leaving this exiled existence and trying to redeem ourselves, trying to find our inner strength, our inner courage, our inner resilience, our inner faith. And how do we get there? And how do we get from that stage of difficulty to the promised land? And he says this is how we do it. We leave the desert, which is Hamidbar, Hagadol, this very vast place. So the first way that our fear starts is when we look at everything around us as so big and ourselves as so small. And it works with the Jewish people as well. We look at the Jewish people as a small nation. We're surrounded by all the non-Jews, some of which really hate us, some of which really are trying to kill us. I mean, if you look at the world's view today, not so far off, This little place of Israel and everyone around us who hates us. And we could feel this vastness, this bigness, and this smallness of who am I? And in our personal lives as well, we can feel that way, like, this one's out to get me, that one's out to get me, this situation, this circumstances that feel so big and overpowering to little me, right? Little me. And the first thing that we need to remember is, as we read in this week's Haftarah, where it talks about how kings and nurses are going to be the ones that nurture you, and they're going to be servants to you in the time period that comes, meaning the Jewish people, in the time of the redemption, people will be so excited to be helping a person who's a member of the tribe of God, a chosen person of the Jewish people, that they'll be so willing to do anything for us. And we do sometimes get a little taste of it. Sometimes we have people who are non-Jews who look at the Jewish people in such, I know when I'm walking with my husband or we're traveling sometimes and he really looks very Jewish, people are so, good Christians are feeling so much like we have to bless you because when we bless you, we will be blessed. And you are a special people, so whatever we are to you will happen to us, the good will happen to us. So they do look at us as the chosen people. Unfortunately, this is a small amount, but we get like a little taste of what that's like. So the first thing to do when we feel this smallness and this vastness all around us, this overpoweringness all around us, is to remember who we are. Ata b'chartanu mikol ha'amim. God chose you from all the nations. You're a nation of God. You're the chosen people of God. God is directing you. God is holding your hand. And God is taking you. So the first thing that we need to do is not attribute significance to this vastness, not to attribute significance to the challenge, to what's around us, to what's surrounding us, to the nations of the world that's around us, to remember that we have God who is protecting us. I can just tell you personally, there are moments when I just feel so overwhelmed with so much. I don't know, Friday I was feeling this way. I was just like, so many things that I was carrying, this and this and that, like all on my, like I was almost like picturing it all on my head. And this little head is carrying like all these things. And from this side and this side and this side, it was like, just kept on coming, right? We all relate to this?
Yes.
And at one point in the day, what I just did was I just physically went like this, and I said,
Oh.
I'm taking all these things, God, and I'm just throwing it to you because you could carry it so much better than I can. And you know what? You do feel better when you do that. And you know what? I think we have to actually physically do it. Like I don't ever do that. No one was home, so no one looked at me like, oh, what's going on? What's happened to Mom? But when we physically take it and we just throw it away, it's like this physical feeling of almost lightness. The situations were still there, but it was the acknowledging, that's not me. It's not me alone who's holding it. It's not me alone who's carrying it. Not me at all. It's the godly soul in me and God who's holding me. That's who I am, and that's who's carrying it all. And I think the physical doing it actually helps, and that's why I think one of the reasons why Judaism is a religion that is full of actual deeds that we do, physical deeds, and we have fruit that we try to remember. We eat, apple dipped in honey, to physically eat something sweet, to physically manifest the blessings of God. The mitzvot are physical manifestations. The mezuzah on our door, we take it and we remember that God is protecting us, as we're going to talk about in this week's parsha. There's total physical manifestations for everything that we do. So that was my little physical manifestation of taking those things and remembering when it feels like it's so vast that, and who am I, that it's not who am I. This is not little me. It's not about little me. I am God's chosen child. And that's huge. That is huge. And if we can remember that, then it's not just little me. So the first thing is this midbar hagadol, this huge, huge wilderness that's surrounding us. But there's a wilderness that surrounds us. There's problems that are around us. And then there's hanora, the dreadful. In other words, there's this vastness that's surrounding you. You might feel like I'm a minority. There's only me. And there's all these enemies around me, like the Jewish people. There's all these people around us. And there's just me. But then there's a worse situation when you actually have to confront those nations, when those nations are actually confronting you. So there's this feeling of this vastness around me, being surrounded with all these issues and, problems or worries that I'm having. And then there's actually when I'm actually involved right now. How do I react right now in this situation when it's confronting me? And the same way with the Jewish people, there's this feeling of this vastness all around us where we might feel, okay, we're the Jewish people, we're tiny, we're such a small minority, and we have Torah, and people don't know the Torah, they don't know the values of Torah, and we're so small. But then there's actually, when we go out into the world, and we're confronting the world, so it's not just I'm staying here in my little niche and it doesn't really affect me. I realize that there's only this place, which is a Beit Chabad. This is a beautiful Beit Chabad, a home that's a refuge of Torah and mitzvot. But what about the world outside? Okay, so right now I'm not but what about when we go out into the world? That's when it becomes dreadful, difficult. So much so that it feels like, it's choking me. It's so hard because that's when I'm confronting the situation. And that on a personal level as well. We have sometimes issues that, there's worries that are constantly on our heads. There might be these like even parenting, there might be a constant worry that's on your head. And then there's the dilemma that I'm right now in a situation and how do I act? And with all our situations, it's like that. There's people who might be against me, but then there's those people who actually are confronting me and actually calling me, like you spoke about, calling me and saying things to me. What do I do with that? And again, the reminder for this is that we're not alone. We're not alone. It's not just me doing what I have to do on my own. It's God holding our hand, God walking with us, God taking care of us. As we read in this week's Torah report, this week's Haftarah, how God says, I'm going to remember you. I'm going to remember you like as if I wrote you on my palm, as if I wrote, sometimes you're in a rush. I know little kids sometimes do that. They want to remember things, students, when they want to remember something for their test. So they write it down on there, they little cheat notes that they want to, but not to cheat, but they want to remember these things, or they want to remember a phone number, they'll write it on their hands, right? Before we had phones people would just write it down. So God says, just like you write it on your palm to remember something, I'm going to remember you. You're right there. You're on my palm. It's something that's going to be so obvious and so much of a reminder that I'm not forgetting you. Just like a mother doesn't forget her little child, I'm never going to forget you. So that's a second point where we have these this vastness that turns into a dreadfulness. And what happens when it turns into this dreadfulness? It becomes a place of serpents. Now, the poison of serpents is hot. So what happens when we feel this, we feel like so much difficulties are surrounding us? We get very heated. We get very full of heat, we don't know what to do. We're hot, just like the poison of the serpents. And this heatedness makes us be involved in things that might not be positive for us. We're trying to avoid what we need to deal with. And instead of dealing with it, instead of remembering holiness and remembering godliness and remembering spirituality, we're deviating into other heated issues. And more so, it becomes even into vipers, which are saraf in Hebrew. And the word in saraf in Hebrew means to burn. We get burned by it. So instead of confronting our fears and dealing with our fears, the fears become even more. They become magnified. It burns us. It becomes something that's burning us, and we become involved in things to avoid it, things that are not godly, things that are not spiritual, things that are going to destroy us even more so. What happens next? Okay, we're going to slowly degenerate worse and worse and worse. I don't know, any of you at night, you can't sleep at night and you get hot and you're sweating and you're consumed with this fear, right? Am I describing what we're going through?
I mean, you should know your audience, right here.
I think I'm starting to sweat. Okay, and then what happens next? Next, it turns into scorpions. Now, the poison of scorpions is cold. So what happens is, at least when there's heat, there's vitality. We might be hot in the wrong way. We might be after things, we might be involved, getting active, we get upset and we get heated, and we're starting to try to not deal with our situation or deal with our situation inappropriately. We get all heated and we burn ourselves, but at least we're alive. When we get cold, that's a sign of almost like death, where there's not this heatedness. It's the opposite of life. It's like Elie Wiesel says, what's the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And that's coldness. So we get this coldness, this apathy. And this is like, when people fall into depression, this is what it's like. It's this lack of movement, this coldness, that at least when you're hot and you're moving in the wrong direction and you're trying to figure out what to do and you're doing the wrong things and you might be burning yourself, but in a way, coldness is even worse because you're not moving. You can't move. You get into this depression where you're just frozen from your initial fear and from your initial overwhelmness. You can't move. You can't do anything. And that is even worse than the heat. And finally, this is like the coldness, the depression, the apathy, and finally it leads to this thirst where there's no water. And this is meaning you realize that I'm thirsting for something deeper. I'm thirsting for a connection, but I don't know what the connection is. So my thirst is leading me to all these places that are they're not places. I have this thirst for something greater, this thirst for meaning, this thirst for purpose. I realize that I need God at my side, but I don't have that water. So instead, what do? I look for other things that are going to dull the heat, dull the coldness, dull the depression, dull the apathy, dull all of it. And that might be a thirst that's being replaced by addictions to all kinds of things that we might be addicted to. It doesn't have to be actual addictions to drugs or just drinking. It could be an addiction to wasting time, to just being on our computer and just dulling our minds because we can't handle life. Just dulling ourselves. It could be an addiction to retail therapy. Let me just go shopping and dull my, just find this, for the moment at least, I'll find something that makes me feel alive. It can be an addiction for all kinds of things that are just dulling this thirst. We're thirsting for something, for meaning, for connection. And when we're not finding it, we look elsewhere to all these other places. And all of this, and we see this with Jews. Unfortunately, the Jews were always the ones that were attracted to all the cults. All the isms. Why? Because we're searching for that purpose, that meaning. So we fill that thirst by looking at all the isms, all the cults, all the places that we shouldn't be. We have to look at our own selves. This is why the Jews go to the Buddhism and to the mountains and to the meditations, because we're not even looking at what we have to quench that thirst, because there's this thirst and we don't know where to find that water. Water, of course, is Torah. Now, where did all this start? So we went from this vastness to this dreadfulness, to this heatedness, to this burning, to this coldness, to this finally this total thirst where there's no water. Where did it all start? It all started from that initial fear, from that first fear, from feeling like everything is so big around me. Everything is so big and I'm little me. I'm just little me who can't handle it. And the antidote, of course, is realizing that we're not little me. It's like when the spies came to the land of Israel and they looked and they see all these, giants there, and they thought, oh, we're like grasshoppers. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. Who are we? We're so tiny, we can't. No, the realization is we're not grasshoppers because we have God at our side. So when we're going through an issue, when we're going through a challenge, when we're going through any of these things that make it feel vast and dreadful and hot and burning and cold and frozen and thirsty, it's realizing that God is at our side. God is there with us. And the way that we go out of this desert is by going to the promised land, by inserting godliness into everything that we do. Feeling God's presence with us, feeling that God is leading us, feeling that God is at our side because God chose us from all the nations. And this is really what the Haftarah talks about, how God promises It says, look to Abraham, your forefather, and Sarah, who bore you. And when we look at Abraham and Sarah, it feels at times like their whole life they were barren. They didn't have children. But look, at the end, they did have Yitzchak. And so too, it feels like our history has been for so long, we're just wandering around, this homeless people. Yet God is saying to us, don't worry. It's just like Abraham and Sarah. I remember them, I'm going to remember you as well. And when you feel this loneliness, when you feel this vastness, remember God is with you. So this is what Moshe reminds them, and he is telling this to them. And then he also then describes the land of Israel that they're going to, and he talks about the 7 special fruits of the land, the special things that the land is known for, that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is known for them. And I want to go through these 7 things as well, because these 7 distinct plants of the land, fruit of the land, tell us about, again, how we can use this idea of totally overcoming the fear that we are feeling. And it talks about, anyone know what are the 7 special foods of the land of Israel? Eretz. Zavat chalav dvash, that's the end, yes. So before that we have Eretz chita, wheat, seora, barley, geffen, yes. Well, geffen first geffen is grapes, te'ena figs, rimon is pomegranates, Eretz zeit shemen, which is olives, and dvash, and dates, the honey of the dates. So these are the special fruits of the land of Israel. And each of these 7 fruits of the land of Israel, again, we're talking about the land of Israel, Israel being the place of our redemption. So when we talk about these fruits of the land of Israel, we can also understand how we can actualize ourselves in a spiritual way. And let's just go through this. So first we start with wheat. Wheat is a human food, as opposed to barley, which is considered an animal food. Now nowadays, it's not necessarily, because everyone's gluten-free, and we probably have barley more than we have wheat. But in the past days, wheat was always a human food, a food that human beings have. We eat bread, which was always made before we started with gluten-free and no wheat. Was always made with wheat. So wheat is considered a human food, and barley was considered a food that was given to animals. So these 2 represent for us the animalistic self within us and the divine self. The human being is a divine being, so the wheat represents our divine soul. The barley represents our animalistic soul. And we need to use both our animalistic self as well as our divine self in our service of God. We need to imbue both of them with godliness. Meaning, don't think animalistic doesn't mean bad. Animalistic just means your characteristics, your things that you shine in, your talents, your things that you are good at, the things that you enjoy. Those things, use those things for a good purpose. Use those things for a godly purpose. Be who you are, your unique self, use it for a godly purpose. So in order to actualize ourselves to being a godly person, we need to use our divine soul, which is a part of us, and that is what makes us tick and what makes us want godly things, good things, but we also need to use our animalistic self. So chita seora, the barley and the wheat, represent our divine soul and our animalistic soul. Next we have grapes, wine, geffen. Now what does wine do to you?
Good.
Makes you happy, yes. The happy hour, right? Wine makes us happy. You want to actualize yourself? Be happy. Judaism is a religion that believes in happy. It's not a religion that says, oh, be bad, be sad, and feel bad about all your things that you do. No, we do that, of course. We sometimes think about the things that we do wrong. But on a general thing, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. Serve God with joy. Be happy. Do whatever it takes to make you happy. And to make yourself happy, sometimes it means smiling. You know, I read that if you smile, that makes you happy. Act happy. You know, laugh. Try it. Try laughing. You know, we were talking about how the physical, how the physical actually manifests itself in reality. So when we actually do physical acts, we become that way. When we act happy, we can become happy. So this Geffen is telling us, be happy. Use your divine self, Bechita. Use your Se'ora, your barley, your animalistic self. Use your Geffen. Find your happiness. Imbue yourself with happiness. Next we go on to the figs. Now, figs, anyone know what Adam and Eve's first clothing were made out of?
Yeah,
Fig leaves, yes, exactly. So the figs represent the garments. Now, when we talk about the garments of our soul, how does our soul have garments? But yeah, just like you have garments, you have a way that you dress that represents yourself to the world. Our soul also has garments. Do you know what the garments of our soul are? Well, that good, but not quite yet. We're getting there. The garments of our soul are actually thought, speech, and action. That's how you show what your soul is. Just like your clothes show who you are, you represent yourself through your clothes. The garments of our soul are our thought, our speech, and our action. Because I can't see your soul, but you can show me your soul through what you're thinking. You can show yourself your soul through what you're saying and through how you act. That's how you show that you're acting with your soul. So the next step of actualizing ourselves is using these figs, meaning using our thoughts and speech and action. We're talking about fear. We don't want to be afraid. Let our thoughts not reflect fear. Let our speech not reflect fear. Let our actions not reflect fear. Think in a way that makes you happy. Think in a way that doesn't make you feel that fear. Try to act in a way that doesn't show that fear. Just like we spoke about the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, how he walked into that room. You know, it's interesting. When you walk into a place and you're shaking, you'll shake more. You'll feel even more afraid, right? When you put on this demeanor of calmness and peace, you actually cause your own heartbeat to stop feeling that way. That's why they say, like, breathe deeply. Breathe deeply actually makes you feel less nervous. You're breathing deeply, you're manifesting it on yourself. So thought, speech, and action, the figs are the way that we create this divine intention in our lives by using our thoughts, speech, and actions to actually do good stuff, which then brings us to the pomegranates. And what are pomegranates? It's full of seeds. Seeds are actions, deeds. This is the deeds. We need to manifest these deeds. After we've thought, spoken, and created this action that we want to do, we actually do the deed. We do the deed which represents mitzvot. Do the mitzvot. And interestingly, the seed is really so small, right? So tiny. But that little tiny seed can be planted and create something so big. So a little tiny seed that we plant can create this change in our own self. And then we find, so these are the ways that we can be in touch with our godly self so that our fears that we were speaking about do not overpower us. This midbar hagadol does not overpower us by accessing our divine and animalistic self in the service of God, by making ourselves happy like the wine, like the grapevines, by using our thought, speech, and action, and then by doing deeds like the pomegranate, even small deeds, starting with small. And finally, we have the last two things of the land of Israel. And if we look at the pasuk, it actually says Eretz Zeit Shemen Udvash. It repeats again the land of Zeit Shemen Udvash, because this is teaching us that this is something that's a little bit longer in process. And when we look at olives are very bitter. It takes a lot of crushing to get out that oil. But that oil produces light, right? Produces beautiful light. And dates also, it takes a very long time for them to grow. But finally, when they do grow, it takes years and years and years. Like there's stories of people who plant trees, and they were said, "Why are you planting a tree? It takes like 70 years for it to actually grow into something that could produce. It takes a very long time." So dates are something that takes a long time to grow. It's a lot of work. And these last two things are just reminding us and teaching us as we go through the challenges that we go through in life, the difficulties that we go through in life, that sometimes the answers aren't instant. We don't have the instant answers. And it takes the hard work. It takes that crushingness. And it takes a long time so we can actually taste that sweetness. But when we persevere in what we need to do in finding that godly soul, in getting out of that midbar hagadol v'hayayom, this dreadful and vast wilderness, we can actually find the promised land. And the last thing that I just want to mention, because we are running out of time, is the last thing that it talks about in this week's portion is about the mezuzah that we have on our doorpost. And if you look at the mezuzah, well, you can't really see inside of it, but if you look at it, when it's rolled up, it has the words Shin Daled Yud.
Shaddai.
Exactly, which is God's name. And that name is also an acronym of Shomer Dalsot Yisrael. It's the God who watches the doors of of Israel. God who watches the doors of Israel. And it reminds us that as we go out, as we go into the wilderness of our lives, as we go about in the many facets of our world, dealing with the world, encountering the world, confronting the world, Shomer Dalsos Yisrael, God is with us. The one who watches the doors of Israel is watching us. He's there with us. It also reminds us when we look at the word mezuzah in Hebrew, the word mezuzah is made out of a mem, and then zuzah, mezuzah, zayin vav, zayin hey. Zu and zah in Hebrew means zah, or zu, is masculine for this and that. It's masculine and feminine, this and that, zu and zah. And that is reminding us the masculine and feminine in the world is God, the cosmic room, and the Jewish people, which is the cosmic bride. So the zu and the zah, the Jewish people and God, are coming together, are uniting. And how are we uniting? With mem. The first letter is mem. What does mem stand for? Mem is the letter of, it means 40. It's numerically 40. What took 40 days and 40 nights?
The midbar.
Well, when Moshe went up in the midbar to get the Torah. Exactly, when Moshe got the Torah. The word Moshe starts with mem. And it's even the books of the Torah, the Mishnayos, which is the books of the oral traditions, starts with a mem and ends with an mm. It starts with the word me'emasai and it ends with the word shalom. Starting with a mem, ending with a mem. So the mem resembles, it reminds us of the Torah. So the way that we reunite the cosmic bride and the cosmic room, and the way that we overcome all these fears that we've been speaking about and actualize ourselves as the 7 fruits of the land of Israel and overcome the desert that we want to all get out of, is through that mem, through that uniting of the cosmic bride, cosmic room, through the Torah, through the teachings of the Torah, the mem. Wow. And so let me wish us that this week we are no longer paralyzed by fear, but when we feel that fear and feel that worry and feel that vastness, we overcome that feeling, just like we spoke about the Frierdiker Rebbe as he walked through those corridors with this total feeling of peace that God is with us and we can accomplish whatever we are meant to accomplish, whatever we need to do. And we have the strength of God behind us.
Wow. Thank you so much.